Welcome builders to course 0 on buildsharper.com. If this is your first course, this is a good introduction to setting up your environment. We're going to help you get Visual Studio installed. We're going to have a little intro to Git, and then we're going to look into a tool to communicate with Git called Source Tree. And then finally, we're going to pull a project down, clone it on our local, and run it in Visual Studio. So kind of end to end, you'll have the tools you need, as well as an example of a project running, so that you can then move on to other courses and have what you need. So let's get started. Okay, so now I'm at visualstudio.com, and we want to go to Free Visual Studio. And the one we're interested in is Visual Studio Community. If you do happen to have a Mac or you're on Linux, you can use Visual Studio for Mac or Visual Studio Code. Those will work as well. In my case, I'm on a PC, so I'm going to use Visual Studio Community, and I'm on version 2022. And I will say that all the projects for Build Sharper are built in .NET Core, which means that they're cross-platform. We'll get into that more in another lesson, but for today, just know that you can use any of these IDEs, that's tech speak for, it's basically a text editor that will also build and run code. So any of these will work. In our case, I'm going to use Visual Studio Community, and let's take a look at the options you'll get when you go to install it. When you go to install Visual Studio, you're going to get options for what they call workloads. This is basically preloading Visual Studio with these libraries that you'll need for your development. And really all we need for this entire stretch of courses is these two. For ASP.NET and web development, it's going to put in ASP.NET, ASP.NET Core, all the basics needed for web development. And then the other is this .NET multi-platform app UI development. And the big one here that we need is Xamarin over here on the right, so make sure that's checked. That's for mobile development. So you can write C# code in .NET and actually deploy it on Android and iOS. So it's pretty cool. You can build multi-platform applications with one code base, which is very, very, very powerful. So instead of having to have your iOS build with a separate set of source code and then your Android build with a separate set of source code, you write it once and deploy it across multiple devices. So this is definitely a useful workload to have on there. Everything else we can download ad hoc as needed. There's what they call NuGet packages, where you can essentially download a library and install it into your project as needed. So these workloads are going to be in there by default. Anything else, like I said, we'll pull in a NuGet package. So, and again, if you don't know what a NuGet package is, no worries. We've got other courses to explain that as well. So I'm going to continue this install, and now let's kind of get into an overview of what Git is. Okay, so Git is a free open source version control tool. It's used to track all your source code. It'll house your source code, but then also track all the changes. So it'll show you who did the change, when it was made. You can compare versions. So if you know maybe a bug was introduced in the latest version, you can go and compare those two pieces of code, and it'll show you line by line what changed. So it really helps in debugging issues. It's great for rollbacks. So maybe you introduce code, like I said, that was buggy, but if you have production users that are on the system and you need to roll back, you can do that easily with Git. The tool we're going to be using to communicate with Git is called Source Tree. So Visual Studio has its own version of, it can connect directly to Git, but I found it's more intuitive to use a separate application. There are those that like to use Git from command line. I do not. I use Source Tree. It's a visual way to represent Git repositories and branching, which can get pretty complicated if you try to use the command line. We're going to sourcetreeapp.com. And again, this is a free tool. They have it for Windows or Mac OS. You can download it here. Once that's installed, all we need to do then is actually pull down the repo. So I'm going to hop over to the Build Sharper project on GitHub. So links are in the description, but github.com/buildsharper. You can see all of our course repositories are here. We're on course 0, so I'm going to click into that. And we can see, here's all the source code for this project. It's just an itty bitty project. It's basically a hello world with a little bit of input, but we'll get there. So this is the source code. What we want to do is click code, and we're going to copy this link. This is a link to the Git file, which is going to pull down everything we need for the project, as well as anything we'll need for the Git repo, such as branching or committing or pushing. By the way, if you don't know what any of those terms mean, don't worry. We have another course specifically on Git, where we go through all of the ins and outs of pushing new code, pulling new code down, doing pull requests, branching, all that stuff. So, but for today, we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to copy this and go back into source tree. Okay, so in source tree, we want to start a new project. So you have what it says clone. Essentially, clone means just pull it down on your local. To recreate the repository locally, you're cloning it. So we're going to paste in the URL that we copied from GitHub. Then we need to have a destination. I'm going to put this, let's create a new folder called projects. And I'm going to create a subfolder called course 0. Okay. And then we click clone. And what this is doing, it's pulling down all the source code from the GitHub repository and putting it on our local. Once we pull it down, we can see all the history that has happened to this project. So a commit is basically it's a bundle of changes. That can be a set of files that have changed, new files that have been added, or files that have been removed. Those changes all get bundled into what's called a commit, and then it is pushed to the branch that you're working from. So we can see here there was an initial commit, and then we had a small tweak that was made. And we can see who did it and at what time. Okay, so now we've got the project locally. The last thing we need to do is actually run it. So now I'm going to go over to Visual Studio. Okay, so here we are in Visual Studio. I've got the solution opened. So a solution is a collection of projects. A project is going to be a specific type of C# project. So it can be a console app, it can be a Windows app, a web app. It can be just what they call a class library, where it's actually just a collection of tools to be used in your code elsewhere. Those are individual projects. Then a solution has all of those projects housed within it. So we have a solution called Build Sharper Course 0, and then there's a project called Build Sharper Course 0.welcome app. And this is the actual app we're going to run. Okay, so we're in program.cs, and this is a pretty straightforward program. We 3 lines of code: console.writeLine, what's your name? Then we're doing var name equals console.readLine. And what that's doing is it's going to have a cursor where it's awaiting input from the user. It's saying, what's your name? And then there's the cursor. So they can then type, and once they hit enter, it's going to copy whatever they typed in and put it as the value of name. So this name variable. So we're going to put that in name, and it'll be displayed here. So this console.writeLine, it'll say welcome to buildsharper.com name, whatever they type. So let's take a look. Okay, so now we've got our app up, and it's asking what's your name. So I'll type Chris, hit enter. Welcome to buildsharper.com, Chris. So it worked, and we can close the window. All right, so that's it. We've completed course 0 for Build Sharper, and we now have the environment set up that we'll need to take into the other courses. We have Visual Studio, we've done a brief intro to Git, we've got source tree, and we've pulled down a project, cloned it on our local, and ran it from Visual Studio. We're off to a great start. So if you're brand new, welcome. We're glad to have you. That's it for now. We'll see you next time.